I used to live up in upstate New York. Maryland, Switzerland. Hello, Switzerland. So glad that you are here. All right, Chicago, Miami. This is fantastic. Wisconsin. Perfect. We're going to give people just another minute to get all logged in. Hey, Jason, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Met you 8 years ago. Hi, good to see you. 8 years later. Here we are. This is awesome. Pennsylvania, Aruba. All right, that's exciting. Jacksonville, Florida. Perfect. BC, thank you, Patrick. Bozeman. Ooh, I bet that's nice right now. I'm in Austin, Texas today. All right, Lancaster, good. Nigeria, Henry, welcome. So glad you made it. All right, Ogden, Utah. There we go. Richmond, perfect. Mildred, thanks for joining. Fabulous. Well, we are just about to get started. So if you would, whatever you're going to take notes with, definitely grab that and make sure you have that handy. We're going to be sending you a whole bunch of things afterwards, so you'll be able to reference all the great data that we're going to share. Thanks so much, BS Graves. All right. Thanks so much. Glad you're here. All right. And San Diego. Hey, Mike. Good to see you. I'm glad I helped you with improving your understanding of your sons. That's fantastic. All right, everybody. Well, let's jump in. Thank you so much for choosing to be with me today. I think at times like now where there's so much uncertainty, change and challenge going on in the world, it's really important to continue to be able to get together, share great information, and help each other. And that, to me, is the purpose of our time today and of this webinar. So I have a few quick housekeeping requests for you, if you don't mind. First, if you have any technical difficulties, since I am doing this by myself, the easiest and best thing I have found for you to do is just log out and log back in. That's the best thing I've found. It solves most of the problems. If you have a comment, please write it in chat. I can see all of the comments right now. Hello, Victor from El Paso. So please write those in the chat. I can see all those. Most importantly, if you have a question today, please put it in the Q&A box. That's a different box than the chat. So make sure you toggle over there and click in the Q&A if you have a question. We should have time for a few questions at the very end. And if there's more questions that we're not able to get to, I will find a way to answer those questions and then send them out to you next week. So lots to cover today. Thanks so much. Let's start with this. All right, everybody, please open up your chat and I want you to answer, why did you choose to attend today? There's a lot of things going on in the world. Why did you choose to attend today? If you would, please write that in the chat because it will help me to know sort of how to directionally adapt my comments today. Subject is important. Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that. Love the presentation. Great speaker. Thank y'all. So nice. I love your last presentation, learning about Gen Z, how they're different. You're a great speaker. Woohoo. Thank y'all so much for that. This is my passion. Great speaker because you need to lead remotely. Love that. Curious. Somebody told me to do it. Outstanding. You spoke at our conference. Love to hear you speak. Outstanding. All right. Fantastic. Someone told you to do it. Seems to be a good theme today. You have 3 generations in your workforce. Awesome. All right. My first experience with you. Okay. Well, we'll do our best to make it fantastic. To be a better employee and leader. Outstanding. All right. So it appears to me that we've got a lot of people that just want to have a great time and get some great content. I promise I will deliver on that. We also have a lot of people asking about leadership, understanding different generations, and this topic is really important to me as a leader, so we'll make sure and talk about that. Okay, perfect. Thank y'all. I really appreciate you participating in the chat. It helps me so much as I'm here in my office by myself with a big ring light in front of me, so thank you for that. All right, so now that we have a sense of why we're here, let me quickly share with you a little bit about me. Then we're going to talk about generations. It appears that there's many of you who have not heard me speak at an event, either a virtual event, which I'm doing all the time now, or in person. So it's always good to sort of step back and talk about what a generation is and isn't, because our views here at CGK are different than you may have seen elsewhere. I'm going to introduce you to the research findings. Now, those of you that are familiar with our research, you know we're research geeks. This is what we do. We lead studies around the world. There is a lot of information in the charts. And I promise you that every single one of you that's on here, we will send you an email tomorrow and you'll be able to download all of the charts. So don't worry about trying to capture everything. We're going to send it all to you tomorrow. I promise you. So you'll get that. So just know you're going to get the charts because there's a lot of information. So I'm going to share with you the research, and then I'm going to share with you 6 actions that we're seeing work right now. And when I selected these 6 actions, I drew on all the different types of organizations we're working on. Some of y'all who follow me online, you know, I have 5 webinars this week. What I didn't put on there is the 5 webinars are all targeted to different geographies and different industries. And that's pretty interesting because we're trying to find insights that work across geographies, but also different roles, types of organizations that we're all dealing with. So we'll share with you 6 things that we're seeing work right now, and then we'll do Q&A. And then for those of you that would like me to do a webinar for you, or you want to set up a strategy call, you'll be able to do that at the end as well. So, all right, good. Fun stuff to cover. Oh, look at that report right there. I'm going to send you the report too, so you'll get that. All right, perfect. A little bit about me. If you've not heard me speak, as you can tell, this is my passion. I absolutely love more than anything else in the world when it comes to work is sharing great new information. I run the Center for Generational Kinetics. We're the leading research firm that studies generations. I'll share with you a little more about us here in a moment. The key thing is we've led more than 65 generational studies around the world. We have several in the field right now. We've also worked with over 700 clients, which enables me to not only take our research, but also combine that with the data of all the different types of clients we're working with, from healthcare and financial services and automotive and retail to software. At the same time, I love to write. I got into this when I was 18 years old. I wrote my first book. It was quite the journey. The book was called Graduate to Your Perfect Job. I was 18 when I wrote it, and it started this entire journey that we've been on ever since. The new book that I have coming out in September, which I'm so excited about, we've been working on it for 2 years, is called Z Economy, How Gen Z Will Change the Future of Business and What to Do About It. We just got some amazing reviews that we got from the publisher. They just sent to us from the big journal. So we're super excited about the new book. It comes out in September. And so I'll share with you more about that on a different webinar. I've presented at over 3,000 events, not counting virtual events, 3,000 in-person events around the world. I serve on a bunch of corporate boards. A lot of people don't know that. And then I advise executives. And so I work with them on a monthly basis. And last, definitely not least, probably first, is I'm a millennial. My wife is in Generation X. Go Gen X! And our daughter is in Gen Z. And if I was home right now, she would probably be playing Roblox. And for any of you that have kids that age, my daughter's 9, they're probably playing Roblox too, or Minecraft or something else. A little bit about CGK. So what we do here is custom primary research. And I want to slow down for a second. Much of what you hear about generations, publicly in particular, in the news, is not entirely true and is certainly not grounded in data. I got into this work because as a millennial, people were saying so many negative things about our generations. And I kept hearing it over and over again. And finally, I shared with my wife, who has a PhD and runs our research center. I shared with her what I was feeling and what I was seeing and how, people would say millennials weren't working. And then we'd look at their workplace data and that's the largest generation they have in their company. And so my wife and I decided that we would start the Center for Generational Kinetics to separate myth from truth. And this is the key when it comes to what we do as researchers before we jump into the research. What we're focused on here at CGK is called behavioral research. Most of the data in the world that we all see is what's called tracking data. So for example, if you're in sales, it would be, did sales go up? Did sales go down? Did leads go up? Did leads go down? Did our NPS score change? All of these things are very, very important, but it's all what we call tracking data, meaning it's data from an event that has already happened. It's just telling us what happened. What's missing from that is why did it happen? So if we look at employee retention or employee engagement, all of these different things, all very, very important data. But I don't just want to know, did sales go up or did sales go down, or are employees happier or less happier? I want to know why. Because if I can figure out why, then I can create a new type of experience and actually change the trajectory. And so that's what we focus on here, is behavioral research, and for all kinds of cool clients. And that's why we're in the news so much. By the way, I just did a 45-minute interview with Fortune magazine, which I'm super excited about. It should come out soon. And if you search my name, you'll see some articles this week from Insider, a bunch with CNBC. So if you're interested in sort of going deeper on that, you can pick up any of those articles or online. All right, cool. Rethinking Generations. For those of you that have heard me speak, you'll be familiar with this. If you haven't, I think this is a really great time to sort of shift, maybe be open to a different way to think of generations. By the way, thank you, Cassie, for the yes and the high five. I appreciate that. Clearly on the Roblox thing. Y'all are living that. That's so fun. All right, let's talk about what a generation is. And I think as importantly, what a generation is not. Now, there's a perception that if you give me your birth years, then I suddenly know all these things about you. That's what generations are. That is not true. Generations are not a box that each of us fit neatly inside based on our birth year alone. And I can't say this enough. This is so important because sometimes you hear things about generations and maybe you feel like, well, I don't fit all of those because we're all still individuals. What generations are, and this is what we do here at CGK when we study generations. Generations to us are a group of people. I'm going to slow it down because I get all excited. A group of people born about the same time who are, this is the key, raised in about the same place. And I say that because nobody, all these generational speakers and people walking around, they talk about generations, but what they don't talk about is the role of geography. Geography is incredibly important because based in this very same generation, you will see differences based on geography. You'll see differences between urban and rural here in the US. I grew up on a ranch. My best friend is from New York City. We're almost identical in age. We have some different views of the world. Same generation, born same year, same month. I share that. So generations will vary in the US, for example, urban and rural versus somebody born outside the US who moved here, who are the exact same age as you. If they're raised somewhere else, they're going to bring that with them. At the same time, as we travel around the world, we do lots and lots of international research. What we'll see is that generations give us great insight, but this is the big thing. The younger you go with a generation, for example, Gen Z or millennials, the more consistent or more similar it is around the world. The older you go, the more different it is, the more they diverge from each other. Why is that? Because of this thing right here. Cheap mobile technology. Cheap mobile technology has enabled younger generations to get connected, to have access to news, entertainment, dating, banking, each other, all of these things. So it's not that mobile technology existed. It's the fact that it had to be cheap. So if I'm in Kenya and I use M-Pesa to pay for things, that's a very different experience than existed 20 years ago. Being able to access the internet because I'm in India and I use my phone to pay, all of a sudden starts to change things. So this is really important. So the younger you go, the more consistent generations are around the world. Now, they're not identical, but the more consistent. So when I speak all over the world outside the US, we could talk about Gen Z and millennials in a big way. But once you get to Gen X and boomers, they're very, very different. So what we're looking for as researchers is what we call predictability by scenario. That's what a generation gives us. And that's sort of the excitement of it, but it's also the limitation. And so we always want to be thoughtful about geography and that generations are not a box, but the way we view them and how we use them when I work directly with leaders is generations are incredibly powerful and predictive clues to faster connect with and influence people of different ages. Now, it's true if they're older, younger, or even the exact same age as you. They're clues, but these clues are so powerful because they help us to connect, build trust, and drive influence. Before I go to the next slide, I need your help. Everybody get your chat ready? Get your fingers ready. Here we go. Please write what generation you think you are. Now, just put it in the chat right now. X, woo, we have a lot of X. Boomers, millennials, boomers in the house. Millennials, boomers, Gen X, woo. Zennial, oh, we should talk about that if we have time. Boomers, 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 Gen X. All caps Gen X, by the way. That is awesome, Gen X. Boomers, boomer, Gen X, good. Millennial with 3 exclamation marks, appropriate. Hybrid X millennial, good. Transcendent. Thank you, Fred. I appreciate everything about that. Maybe a cusper, good. All right, multiple generations. Perennial. That's interesting. I haven't heard that one before. All of the above. That's what I'm talking about right there. Boomer. Okay. So just keep that in mind as we go into this next slide, and I'll share with you the birth years. I'm taking a little extra time today to talk about the birth years. Those of you who've heard me speak at a normal webinar or a virtual keynote, you know we spend a lot of time talking about each generation. We won't do that today because this is a research webinar, but on a normal one, we'd really dive into those. So let's go to the next slide and look at the generations by birth year. Now, first, let me say, this is much more consistent for North America, and we find this to be consistent in other parts of the world. But remember what I said, as you travel around the world, the birth years will shift a little bit. So what do we need to know when we look at this right now? So everybody please take a look at the birth years, sort of see where you fit, maybe kids, grandkids, coworkers, whatever you have there, just take a look. Gen Z is the youngest, then we have millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. Let me clear up some questions that are probably going to get put in the Q&A. First, somebody's going to ask, well, Jason, how do we know when generations start and stop? Great question. How do we know what that is? Well, sometimes there's what we call a generation-defining moment. That is a moment that stops you in your tracks and causes you to see, to view the world differently than you did before. So let me walk you through 2 of those. For millennials, my generation, our generation-defining moment was September the 11th, 2001. I remember exactly where I was. I was in Los Angeles. I was out there with my father. Some of y'all know my dad travels with me sometimes. My dad's a Mr. Baby Boomer. He's a big guy, 6'5", and we were sitting there in Los Angeles. We woke up. He's sitting on the couch. I'm sitting in another place. We turn on the TV and we see what's going on September the 11th, 2001. And I just start crying. Like, I am completely in shock, total train wreck, because my family on both sides is from New York. Even though I was born and raised in Texas, all of my family is from New York. I went to college in upstate New York, which a lot of people don't know, and my friends worked downtown on September the 11th, 2001. So I am a total, I'm just crying. Like, I'm just crying. I'm completely in shock. My dad is sitting on the couch with no emotion. He was born in 1952, so no emotion at all. He's just sitting there looking at the TV, sort of looking at me. And then my grandfather calls, and listen closely to this. My grandfather was 80 years old, and he calls me up, and this is what he says. J-Boy, it's going to be okay. I promise. We've been through this before, and we got through it, and we'll get through it again. I promise you it's going to be okay. What was my grandfather referring to? Pearl Harbor. So for him, he sees what happens in 9/11. He thinks back to Pearl Harbor, and then in his mind, he plays the tape forward. My dad won't tell me what he's thinking about. I have no context for this. It takes me about 5 years, and my dad finally tells me, because I wanted to put in one of my books, and he told me that while he was sitting there on like the couch, looking at me, looking at the TV, looking at me, looking at the TV, he was to get drafted. This is what we call generational context. This is a term that we invented. And what it means is this. You have one event. Let's just take 9/11. My grandfather, 80 years old, thinks of Pearl Harbor. My dad, born in 1952, thinks of the Vietnam War and thinks, I'm going to get drafted. I'm a millennial. I have none of those things to compare it to. And now this is the key. Gen Z, who's up to 25 years old, does not remember 9/11. So for them, it's always been history. It's something they learned about in school or from their parents, or they have some faint memories of somebody telling them about it. But it wasn't a contemporary experience when they were coming of age that changed their view of the world. It has to create fear, uncertainty of the future, and all of that starts to change you. Why is this important? Because right now, Gen Z, based on our research, Gen Z is going through their generation-defining moment, which is COVID-19. Why is that important for somebody like me who studies this? My new book's coming out about Gen Z, is because it tells us for the first time when Gen Z ends. Because what our research shows is 4- and 5-year-olds today will not remember COVID-19 in this pandemic period in the way those kids who are older than them do. My daughter's 9 years old. This has been massively disruptive in her life. She can't see her friends. She can't do all the stuff that she wanted to do. We had total waterworks last week. She's just like, I just want to see my friends. I want to get out of the house. I want to do all these things. She's just would have finished 3rd grade and going into 4th grade. So for her, this is the experience. Now, I share that because 4- and 5-year-olds today, they may say they got more time with their parents or a parent or their family, but it's a very different experience than those who are older. So for the first time, we know that the generation after Gen Z is not only born, but they're already 3, 4, 5 years old. So when we look at generation, sometimes you have a generation-defining event that tells you here's where one ends and a new one begins, and then sometimes you don't, and this is the key. So when we look at Gen Z, you'll notice that Gen Z starts in 1996. A whole bunch of the big research firms used to say that Gen Z, that millennials went to 2000 and Gen Z started in 2001. And we, based on behavioral research, realized that that was completely false. And the reason is you have to be old enough to remember the event. It has to create fear, that really strong, scary emotional anchor, and then that will change you. Which means that if you were born between, let's say, 1996 and 2000, you wouldn't be a millennial because you don't have that experience. So that's how we know. Now, sometimes between the birth years such as Gen X and millennials, which I see a few of you are posting about, there is not an event. Sometimes it's a transitional period. So really anywhere from 1977 to 1981 could be the beginning of the millennials or the end of Gen X. You're what's called a cusper, and it's actually an advantage because it makes you empathetic to both generations, both sides. You can understand where they're both coming from. So as you think about this, what does that mean? For example, if you were a cusper and you lived in an urban area and you were born in 79, you would have seen trends sooner than somebody who lived in a rural area. If you were affluent, you would have seen trends sooner If your parents went to college, university, you would have seen trends sooner. If you moved around a lot, you would have seen trends sooner, just because the pace of information was much different in the late 70s. Now, what we also see is that millennials have split into two different generations. We call them megalennials and millennials. We won't talk about them today because we don't have time. But if you ever catch one of my other webinars that I do for leaders and organizations, we talk a lot about megalennials and millennials because they're very different, yet people tend to lump us together. So we have Gen Z, who's the youngest. We have millennials, who are the next youngest or oldest. The average millennial, by the way, is now over the age of 30. The oldest are around the age of 40. And then we have Gen X. Woohoo, Gen X. So just let me give you a few quick high level before we go on. So what do we know about Gen Z? We're seeing this, and we wrote about this a lot in the new book's Economy. Gen Z is much more practical with their money. If they get $40 for their birthday, they put it away and go back and ask their mom or dad, can I have $40 to go buy something? And their parents say, but you just got $40 for their birthday. And they'll say, yeah, but that's my money. Much more conservative with their money. As we look at them, their number two thing they want, the 20-somethings, is benefits, which is totally strange for somebody their age. They have a different relationship with technology than millennials. It's dramatically different. They are absolutely not millennials 2.0. I could spend the whole hour with you here today sharing with you about Gen Z. Key thing is they're very different from millennials. What do we know about millennials? Huge generation, very diverse, although Gen Z is more diverse. What we see with millennials, key thing here is they're experiencing delayed adulthood, which means they're hitting all these gateway markers to adulthood later. And that's important because they're just hitting them all later. We have the generational split that I shared with you. And the millennial generation is much more complex than people talk about. In fact, the group most offended by millennials acting entitled at work, other millennials who do not feel entitled. Ooh. Then we have Gen X. Gen X really is the bridge or the glue in the workforce. What we see from Gen X is they're naturally skeptical. They're very into the data. As I share with you, my wife is in Gen X. Her motto is trust, but verify. Gen X is the only group that comes up to me after an in-person event, or they'll email after a webinar and they'll say, Jason, I enjoyed your presentation. I didn't think I would. I'd love to see your data. And there's all these reasons because of what happened that led to Gen X being skeptical. I think Gen X gets a bad rap. We don't talk about them enough. They're incredibly important, and they're also at a really tough life stage right now. Then we have baby boomers, who are the parents of millennials. And let's just point out, by the way, entitlement, 100% a learned behavior. Baby boomers, people say stuff like, okay, boomer, which really bothers me. I was at an event, they're like, boomers don't know anything about technology. I'm like, the boomers invented the technology you're relying on. They made it out of thin air, right? You can't even connect to the Wi-Fi. They actually made that phone. So I share that with you. So boomers are the most influential generation. Most organizations where we work, they have 3, 4, some have 5 generations of employees. Many are now serving 5 generations of customers or clients. So lots of excitement here. And hopefully you'll join me for another webinar where we'll dig into each of those because we can really unpack those for quite a while. All right, let's jump into what we're here for, which is how is COVID-19 impacting each of the generations? Now, remember, I'm going to send you all the slides that are from here on. So just be aware, we're going to cover a lot. This slide doesn't have a chart on it, but it does walk through by generation what's happening. And I think this slide is incredibly, incredibly important. And here's why. There are a lot of people running around today saying, we're all in this together. I bet you've heard that 100 times. Am I right? We're all in this together, which, by the way, is a true statement. There should be an asterisk, though. And the asterisk is, but we're all experiencing this differently. So yes, we're all in it together. We're all going through the same stuff. I've got my face mask right here, my hand sanitizer, like right here. Exactly. And we're all in this together, but we're experiencing it differently. And what we're seeing is we're experiencing it differently by generation, as I'll share with you in the data. Now, one key thing to just stop for a second and make sure that we're on the same page on. When it comes to generations, sometimes people ask me things. I was at an event and somebody asked me, Jason, what are you going to do when you become Generation X? That would be strange. So we're all clear. You stay in the same generation. You just get older. So you pass through different life stages, but you stay in your same generation. I know that seems obvious, but sometimes people are a little bit confused about that. So let's walk through what we're seeing with each generation. For Gen Z, what we have determined is that Gen Z right now is going through their generation-defining moment. COVID-19 is their where were you when moment. It is their 9/11. It is their JFK assassination. It is their Great Depression, even Great Recession, in many ways worse than the Great Recession for them. So this is their moment. But if you followed along in the news, I talk about this a bunch right now, so please listen closely to this. Older members of Gen Z are having a different experience than younger members of Gen Z. The older you are, the more negative impact this is going to have for you. Why is that? If you're already in college, and let's pretend you're now going to be a senior next year, and you spent all your time studying, I'm going to make it up, retail merchandising, and now there's no retail jobs, that's a pretty big pivot that you're going to have to make, right? Or you've accumulated all this student loan debt, and then now you thought you were going to be able to go into a robust job market, and it's not there, and you don't know when it's going to be. What we found is the older you are in Gen Z, the more this is going to impact you, at least short term, because so many of the plans that you made are no longer the plans you'll be able to act on. Do you go to college this fall? By the way, we'll talk about this with Gen Z, most economically impacted generation from COVID-19. But here's the twist. Younger members of Gen Z, we believe, could actually make this into a positive, and here's why. Younger members of Gen Z are going to figure out how to do online learning because all the schools and everybody else, we're all trying to figure it out. There will be massive, massive improvements in online distance learning, online collaboration, you name it. My daughter's 9 years old. She turned in on her last day of school, virtual school. She turned in a whole presentation that I had never seen. She built it on Google Slides. She used animation. She turned it in through Google Classroom, and then she recorded herself presenting it and turned that video into her teachers. She's 9. Now, for her, all of that is going to be increasingly normal going forward. Whether or not she wants to be in school, which she would much prefer, the fact is she's now learning all these skills. They also are going to get the benefit to look ahead and say, okay, I don't want these majors, or I don't want these careers, or I don't want to take a job in these areas. So the more runway you have until that jumping off into adulthood, the more you can learn from those before you. Much in the same way that Gen Z previously had said, we don't want to end up like millennials. Really wild, and definitely read the report. There's a lot more about it. So then we look at baby boomers. What are we seeing with baby boomers? This is a very precarious time for them to go through a huge financial and health sort of catastrophe. And what do I mean by that? Many of the boomers that we're interviewing, they've had to take unpaid time off. They're not able to work. But for many of them, they're also having to now draw down on their savings. And they'd saved up to get to this place. What's the result? We think boomers are going to now have to work as long as possible in order to be able to support themselves. It's going to be a huge issue. It's going to affect a lot of generational wealth transfer and much more than that. This is a really rough time for them to have to go through this in terms of life stage, not generation, but life stage. My dad's going through this right now, and it's just awful. It's absolutely awful. Then we have Gen X. Gen X is being pulled in 3 different directions. What do I mean by that? Gen X is often taking care of their kid or kids. They're often now taking care of a parent or parents, and they're still working or trying to find a job. You know, my wife's parents are in their 80s, and so we are financially often trying to help them. We are physically trying to solve problems for them to be able to help them. And we're doing all these things to try to help them because it's, you know, it's an honor for us to be able to serve them. That's what we're about. But at the same time, it's also really tough because now you're worried about your parents' health and how are they going to get their groceries and who's going to help them do this, that, or the other, and plus money, plus everything else. At the same time, we're trying to make sure Raya's 9 years old. Is she getting what she needs? So Gen X is really being pulled in a lot of different directions. Then you have millennials like me who really are getting hit with 2 different economic tsunamis. One was the Great Recession that older millennials crashed into. And then now we have COVID-19. So many millennials tell us just when they thought they finally were going in the right direction, things were finally coming together, they're sort of bookended with this very negative economic events. So just notice, same exact pandemic, but some very different experiences by generation. And we could dig a lot more into this, but in the interest of time, we're going to keep going. All right, here we go. So the new national study, lots of things are on these study slides. If you've not seen me present research on a webinar before, again, this isn't what I would normally do as a webinar for leaders or as a webinar for our virtual keynote, those kinds of things. This is really a research reveal. It's me sharing my new research with you. So it's going to feel a little bit different, right? So just hang with me. I promise I'll explain how all the slides work. First thing is I want to make sure and always talk about the study sample. Now, why do I do this? If you've ever seen me present research before, you know I harp on this. And the reason is people throw around data as if all data is the same, and it's not. Data means different things to different people, and the word research means different things to different people. So whenever I'm presenting research, I'm always going to share the sample so you know where the data came from. That actually helps you to know about the integrity of the data. So what was this particular study that I'm sharing with you now? We had 1,000 completes. As you can see, we had multiple generations represented, but here's the key. This was weighted to the United States Census for age, gender, geography, and ethnicity. Why is that important? This is an accurate snapshot of America. Sort of in our lingo, what we would say is that the margin of error is plus or minus 3.1, 19 out of 20 times against the US Census. So it basically means this is a snapshot of America. We can make decisions against this. Now, we could do different studies, which we frequently do, of people who, going to make it up, travel on airplanes or own a certain type of car or have a certain amount of money or certain education or have overcome certain challenges. All of those we can do, but today's study is a snapshot of America, so we can really see what's going on by generation. All right, let's jump in. These slides I'm not going to read to you because we're going to send you copies of it. The key here is this. Leading multiple generations was hard before the pandemic. Now it is even harder. If everybody would you please go all the way over here to the Zoom webinar chat. I've got my chat open, and the first thing I would like you to do is to please type on there how many different generations you work with on a regular basis. 1, 2, 3, 4, however many it is. Ooh, 4, 5. We got a bunch of 5, 3, 4, all of them. Like you just spelled out all of them. 5, 4, 3, lots of 3, sometimes 4, all. Thank you. 3 to 4, 3, 5, all in all caps. Thank you for that one. 3 to 4, 5. Okay. Now, let me ask you that question differently. How many of you have suffered in some way from Zoom fatigue? You get to the end of the day or the end of a call or Zoom and you're like, oh, this is exhausting. Where are my people? Yes, thumbs up. Yes, that's me. Victoria, you raised your hand. I like that. Look at all those hand raises. That's funny. All right, better than, yes, oh, yes, absolutely, yes. All right, look at that. Y'all are just, Sonny wrote Zoom, Teams, Skype. What is life outside of Zoom? There we go. Perfect. So I just want to share that with you because this is a real deal. This is a real experience that we're all going through. So it used to be hard to lead multiple generations when we were often physically present. Now you're having to do that with multiple generations and you're not physically in the same space with them. So what's important in these types of situations is to understand what are each group experiencing, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so here's the first slide. Now hang with me, and I want to go through each of these. I'm going to move my chat out of the way just a little bit here so that we can actually, so I can see everything on the slide with you. All right, perfect. So what I want you to notice here is that we asked the question about what are they experiencing at your job in the last 30 days. This is what I want you to notice. This is really key. Notice the first one, the top answers. My work hours have decreased, 36%. I'm less busy now at my job than I was before, 35%. I'm busier now at my job than I was before, 26. And then the focus of my job has completely changed. Why did I circle those in red? Because here's what I want you to notice. The remote work or the work experience in general is not equal. For some people, you're working less. Some people are working less. They've been furloughed. They've lost their job. This whole experience of the pandemic right now has caused them it's caused their work situation to get much more challenging, right? It's decreased and they're less busy. And then I would even throw the fourth one in there, which is the focus of my job has completely changed. So these are the negatives, but here's what I want you to notice. So on one hand, you have people that are saying they're less busy, but 26% of people say they are busier now than they were before. This is lost in all the conversation about the pandemic. Yeah, you have one group of people that maybe have less to do or aren't working. You have another group of people that are working harder than ever before. And I would argue probably for less money oftentimes. So when we talk about what's going on in America around work today, the perception is people are all working less. The reality is for lots of us, we're actually working more. I know for me, I have 5 webinars this week, and I share that because I'm working more now than I ever have. What's the difference? The difference is I didn't have 10 flights this week. The difference is I get to go home for lunch and see my wife and daughter, which is awesome, and tuck my daughter in at night and read her a book and those kinds of things. But at the same time, the number of hours I'm working right now are longer than ever before. And for me, it's because I serve on a bunch of corporate boards and I advise lots of execs and leaders. But still, the cumulative effect on that is I'm actually working dramatically more than I did before. And so I share that because when we talk about this experience, the public perception often is that people are working less. The reality is for lots of people, they're working more. Look at this. So yes, I know a bunch of y'all are asking questions. We'll do our absolute best to get through them. And I promise I'll send you all the slides so y'all can cut through that, which is great. Thank you for that. Okay, so we start there. But here's where we broke it down by generation. Because again, today's presentation is about generations, not so much the other data that we could have cut it by. So first, my work hours have decreased. Who is most impacted by that? Gen Z. I'm not able to get to work or get paid, but I did not lose my job, which is generally being furloughed. Look at that, 37%. The focus of my job has completely changed. I mean, we can go through all these. Here's the key thing. The narrative in the news in the last few weeks, and maybe even a month, is that millennials are the generation that are most negatively impacted by the pandemic. What we have found is that is not true. The millennials over-index for the amount of coverage we get because of the pandemic. I am a millennial, right? This is what we look at. However, Gen Z is the one who is most negatively impacted. And that is really scary because this is a critical time in their career, time for their self-worth, how they believe in themselves, how they operate in the world. And many, many times, they are absolutely getting crushed in this experience. Lots of reasons for that. We could say last hired, first fired. They have the least experience. They don't have the right professional networks. We can go through a whole bunch of things. But at the end of the day, what we're just seeing is that Gen Z has really negatively been impacted by this. And we're concerned about what is that going to mean going forward? How is that going to carry with them into their career? And it could be different. You know, older millennials struggled through the Great Recession. Many younger millennials actually benefited from a robust recovery. So you can be in the same generation and have very different economic experiences. But the key here is right now today, the generation most impacted is Gen Z. All right, let's keep going. So then we wanted to look at the experience by generation. What did we see? What generation is most often working completely remotely or from home? Millennials, my people. But this is the one that pulls me in. The focus of my job has stayed the same. Who is that more than anyone else? Gen X. I am telling you, Gen X is the glue in the workforce. We do not talk about them enough. They are critically important, and we're not sure why they answered this way. In future studies, we're going to ask the question differently and see if we can pull that out. But we needed this first benchmark study. Why do I share that? Because for whatever reason, wherever Gen X is in their career or in their job, with their employer, they're having the most consistency. Now, I have a bunch of theories of why that is, but the key thing is Gen X is still having the most consistent experience. But let's drop down to the last one. What group had to take the most unpaid time off? Baby boomers, who, by the way, are the group that can least afford it. This is what, I'm going through with my dad. So I share this with you because, again, what I want us to see is, yes, we're all in this together, but we are having different experiences. And when we go to lead remotely, it's important to keep this in mind. Okay, we'll keep going. You can tell I love this stuff. There's a lot more to cover, so let's keep going. New workplace dynamic. Let's talk about technology. How many of you today feel, and just write it here in the chat, more connected or less connected with other people, like outside your immediate family, people that you're living with? More or less? Ooh, more or less, same. Thank you for adding same. I appreciate that. More, less, same, less. Woo, lots of less, some more, less, about the same, less, same, less, same. More, less connected, less in all caps. All right, connected differently, good. All right, less connection is focused on my job. Connect much less as it relates to work. Say mixed bag, more connected to my neighborhood, less with work. Great answer. All right, so I share that because, again, technology is one of these tools that can connect us, but at the same time, it can also divide us. And I'm not talking about equity issues or any of those types of pieces right now. I do talk about that a lot, but I'm saying right now from a functional standpoint, many people feel that they're more connected through technology in terms of I'm accessing everybody, I can see everybody. Instead of just doing phone calls, everybody's doing Zoom, all these types of things. So on one hand, technically we might be more connected, but if we ask them, do you feel more connected? They say no. At the same time, I think we're confusing a lot of innovation with acceleration. When we look at data from our clients, for example, mobile banking app usage, right? That was not innovation. Oh, wow, suddenly everybody's using mobile banking. It was already happening. But instead of taking 3 years, it's been compressed down to 3 months. Why? Because the branches aren't open. And all of a sudden people get on there and go, oh, this isn't as terrible as I thought it would be. And even my dad now uses mobile banking, which is a pretty amazing thing. So I share that because when it comes to technology, I do not believe currently we're experiencing a lot of innovation when it comes to connection. What I feel like we're experiencing right now is a lot of acceleration. Do I think we'll get to innovation? Absolutely. But I don't think we're there right now. I think a lot of what's going on is acceleration, sort of the stopgap measures. But I think long term, what's going to come out of it is actual innovation. And that's what gets me excited. You could see this was one of our clients. What would have taken us 3 years to do, we did in 2 weeks because we had to. He was referring to all these huge call centers that he runs where they figured out how people could just take the computers home and then operate, which they wanted to do on their roadmap, but they didn't think they would actually ever be able to do it, and now it's happening. All right, let's keep going. So when we wanted to know about, are you working completely remotely or from home, what do we find? About 47% of people said yes, they're working completely remotely or from home. You have to be careful when people talk about work from home because they may not physically be working in their home. Maybe they're working somewhere else, but they're not working in an office. So we always want to be sensitive and we define all these characteristics. I've seen this work done a few other times, specifically this question, and it generally is around 47, 48%. But what I want you to notice, who's doing it more than others? Millennials. Sort of interesting. All right, we'll keep going. When it came to Zoom, this is why I asked you the question earlier about Zoom fatigue. What did we find out? Video chat. Lots of people are using it for the first time. How many of you, just write yes if this has happened, how many of you have been on a Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts or pick whatever platform you want? You've been on one of those with other people who don't have a lot of experience using those types of platforms. Has this happened? Yes. Absolutely, yes. OMG, yes, that's so funny. Yes, yes, yes. Ugh, thank you all day, every time. Don't get me started. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes, yes. Ugh, yes. Somebody wrote, mute your mic. Thank you. Yes, that's definitely the awkward one. So I share all that because there's a lot of stress and learning going on right now, whether you're seeing the top of people's heads or they don't have a light or their audio's going on or whatever's happening. These types of things are very real, which, by the way, is part of the reason it's so stressful. On one hand, it's really nice because we get to see people and you can have some of these experiences, maybe get to know them a little bit more about what's behind them. So let's see over here. That's the last book I wrote. This is the new book I wrote. And that's my wife and daughter right there behind me, right? This was my first really big article. This one was in the Wall Street Journal. And then this is a Life magazine cover story. I collect these that's talking about the generational gap. And that one is from 1968. So there seems to be some themes here as we go through this. When we talk about this, what I just want you to notice, this whole idea of remote work is very stressful and a learned behavior for lots and lots of people, which is really the point. Okay, now let's dive in a little bit deeper. So then we asked, I have the tools I need to successfully work remotely. Now, if I was to ask you to leave here and take a few steps, these are not at the end of it. These are just things I would share with you as we're friends. One of the questions we find it's very effective to ask if you're leading a remote team is, do you have the tools you need to be successful working remotely? Or I like a spin on it, which is, are there any tools I could buy you for under $50 that would make you more effective or more efficient in working remotely? It's really stunning to figure out that for a $20 fix or a $30 fix or a $50 solution, all of a sudden they get some tech that then they can do things that are much, much better, not just for them, but for everybody else. But we don't ask that. We just sort of assume that people have what they need. And for lots of people, they don't. But they also don't want to ask because maybe they're embarrassed about it. So what we found is about 40% of America did not have the tools they needed to work successfully remotely. But going deeper into more the mindset piece, which is my thing, after the pandemic, I prefer to work remotely part of the time. And then you can see down at the bottom, full time. If you only pulled out one insight from this entire presentation today, hopefully you'll get 10, 20, 30 of those. That's my goal. But if you only got one, this to me is the one that I think has the biggest macro impact. And that is a majority of all Americans would not prefer to work remotely once the pandemic is over. Now that's of right now. Could that change in a year? Absolutely. But right now, a majority of Americans still want to go into work. Now, what is that going to look like in the future? I don't know. But what I can share with you is for a lot of people, they still feel like they're going to be more effective if they go into a work environment. Now, do I think that will change? I think so, particularly as we get better at technology and working together and collaboration and all these kinds of things. However, there's a lot of people like me, I physically like to go into a work environment. And I just share that because the perception out there is nobody's ever going to go to offices again. And that's not what we're finding. And frankly, there's tons of jobs that you need to physically be there if you're a welder, a plumber, and other things like that. So while we talk about remote work, really to me what it comes down to is remote leadership. How do we lead remotely? All right, let's keep going. So when we cut this by generation specifically, what do you see? Gen X, woohoo, Gen X in the house again. Gen X was the group that most had the tools they needed to work remotely. right? That's really important. And as we go further than that, you can see Gen X scores really well, as do millennials on many of these. All right. Now, I just want to point that out because if you have the tools that you need to be successful remotely, then it's a better experience for you because you have what you need to be successful, and those shift by generation, as you can see. All right. Now, we get more into the mindset piece. If you go to the bottom, you can always see the questions. We always put the questions on there verbatim. Please indicate whether or not each statement about working remotely is true for you. I feel more connected to my coworkers or team. That's Gen Z, much more than anybody else. I feel like remote work has negatively affected my work-life balance. Gen Z, right? My employer needs to provide me with better tools to work remotely. Gen Z. I feel like remote work has been an imposition on my life. So this is what really gets my attention because on one hand, Gen Z is saying, I feel more connected to everybody, right? They grew up using a lot of these devices and ways of communicating, particularly video. By the way, Gen Z is the video first generation. However, they're the ones that also report the most negative experiences from remote work. That's why all these things are much more complex, I think, than the headlines would lead us to believe. And bottom left, I do want to point this out because we're working a bunch in what we call reboarding, which is helping leaders strategize about how do you bring people back, what kind of training do they need, how do we get everybody aligned, what are the expectations, and so forth. So as we think about reboarding, one of the key issues, of course, is workplace safety. 45% of Americans worry about their health and safety when they work outside their home or return to work outside their home. So this is really, really difficult. Sarah just wrote, can you imagine starting your career remotely? It's a very real deal right now, and particularly for people that have maybe never worked in a professional environment. There's a lot of people graduating from college that haven't had a lot of professional experience, and now their professional experience is having to work remotely. It's going to change all kinds of things. So we'll keep going. All right, so what each generation wants. Now, in terms of actually leading, meaning you're going to drive forward and drive those results you need, what's critically important is to figure out what does each generation want, because then you can go and determine whether or not you want to adapt. Remember I said that first question I'd love for you to go back and ask is what's something inexpensive that if we bought this for you would help you be more effective in terms of working remotely? The other one that I would ask you to do is to create what's called a generational snapshot, or you could say, what is the percentage of each generation in my workforce? Creating these pie charts is really helpful because you can visualize how much of each generation you have, which as you see what each generation needs, you can then overlay and say, okay, if I wanted to adapt to this generation, these are the types of things that they need. So generational pie chart or snapshot is what we call it, hugely powerful. All right, so what did each generation want? First on the whole, this one, I love this, but not for one of the red circles. So we asked, what qualities do you most want from your manager or supervisor during these challenging times? Number one, being honest and candid. Give me the truth. Tell it to me straight. Communicating clearly. But what was number three? Caring and empathetic. And then number four, being well-informed. Statistically, we could flip caring and empathetic with being well-informed, so either of those there. So basically, the top three are about better communication. And here's what I want you to notice. If you go all the way down to showing strength and resilience, that is the one when we talk to managers, they think they need to do. Oh, we need to motivate everybody. We need to tell them we're going to get through this. We got to give that, sort of that big motivational speech. That was actually number one at the bottom. Everything else scored higher than that. People want honesty right now. They want candor. They want clear communication from you. That is what they want and need. Now, when we cut this by generation, it gets even more surprising. Who wrote being well-informed? Said that's what they wanted? Gen Z. Being empathetic to the challenges of those they're leading. Gen Z most wanted empathy. Who least was looking for empathy? Millennials. And for my millennials on here today, I know we have a lot of millennials because y'all answered that earlier. For my millennials, I want to call this out because if we often ask other generations, who would have most wanted empathy from their manager? They would have said, oh, those millennials, right? Like we're coddled and they need to give us another trophy. The reality is millennials scored the lowest on wanting empathy compared to the other three generations. So I want to call that out, sort of double click on that so you and I know this is interesting. Remember, my mission is to separate myth from truth around generations so you can be a better leader or drive better results. And it's these kind of insights that when we find, we can then put them to use. Being well prepared, millennials, quickly solving problems, awesome for millennials, but go all the way to the bottom. What did Gen X and baby boomers want the most? And you can see very strongly, honesty and candor. Part of what I would argue is not only is that generational, but it's life stage. They've been through these types of things to some degree before. Just tell me what's really going on. I'll figure out what to do with it. Just tell me what's really going on. And I think that's very, very powerful. All right, we'll keep going. Let's talk about trust. Trust, I believe, is going to be one of the biggest topics that comes out of this in terms of how do we create trust across generations. It's not talked about right now, but I promise you, when we start looking at reboarding and all the things ahead, trust is going to be absolutely essential. And you'll see when we get to the 6 actions I recommend where trust plays into all of that. All right, what do we see here? I feel like my employer is acting with integrity during these tough times. 48%. That means 52% feel the opposite. I feel like I can trust my manager during these tough times. Majority of Americans don't agree with that. I feel like I can trust my company's CEO or owner during these tough times. That score is even lower than their manager. Now, I share this with you because I believe, again, we're going to work along in this space. Trust is going to be one of those issues that is going to bubble up, particularly when we move back into reboarding and bring people back into the workforce. It's going to be a huge, huge issue. And I'll share with you what to do about it here as we keep going. All right, so then we broke it down more. What do we see? We saw that Gen Z was trying to figure out and pay close attention to how a company treats employees when they're being laid off or let go. Maybe Gen Z is even considering other jobs. There's a lot of reasons for that. I feel like my employer's acting with integrity. This, to me, was stunning. Millennials, more than any other generation, feel like their employer is acting with integrity. Thanks, Genevieve, for writing wow with the big smiley face. Yeah, this stuff is really wild. I feel like I could trust my manager. Who is that? Millennials. I promise you, if we would have asked generations this questions to rate other generations, they would not have picked millennials as the one that most think that their employer is acting with integrity. And it's really millennials and Gen X. Notice here that boomers and Gen Z are most similar. By the way, we write about this a lot in the Zeconomy book, but also if you've seen me speak, I talk about this because Gen Z is what we call, in many respects, a throwback generation. In many ways, they're similar to baby boomers. So really, really fascinating. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, actions. Let me move my chat to the other side over here now so that I can see all of our actions with you. Okay. I will send these to you. You don't need to write them down, but if you want to write them down, that's absolutely fantastic. I picked 6 actions that I thought would have the sort of the broadest use so that no matter what business you're in, you could be able to put this to use, even if you work for the government or with your local nonprofit or some other purpose-driven group that you're focused on. I wanted to give you actions that you could use. First thing we found that we need to have happen right now, you have to share and repeat your North Star. Now, there's a little bit of a twist on this. It's very easy in times of uncertainty and stress and crisis that people forget what they're working for, or forget what they're trying to move towards. Right? It's very easy to lose that. So what leaders have to do is remind and reinforce what is that North Star. But here's the twist. In our work, and we've seen this repeatedly, the most important person to talk about that North Star, managers and supervisors. It is the leader closest to the front lines that most determines the mindset, the beliefs of that front line. It's not the CEO that records a video and sticks it on YouTube and posts it on Twitter. It's the manager or supervisor, that direct one. So it's not so much that the CEO said this, it's that employee then texts their boss or calls up their boss or gets on Zoom and said, what do you think about what you just heard? Or do you think that's true? That's what actually determines the trust in that North Star. So that frontline supervisor or direct manager, those are the ones that are really driving that alignment right now. Number 2, offer communication aligned with each generation. This is a great example. So today's webinar, I've got my little video. We're using Zoom. I've shared with you this presentation deck. But I know that for a lot of people, video is pretty exhausting. And we have shared so much information today that it's going to be hard for anybody, including me, and this is my webinar, to remember everything. So what do? Well, we're going to send you the slide deck, right? We're going to send you that deck. We're going to send you the executive summary report. You're going to get that. I'm going to record a summary video for you that I'm going to send to you. And, all these things. Why do I share that? Because what we found is you need to give people information in a bunch of different ways so they can go back and refer to it and also share it with others. Right? That's what's so important right now. These are all high-stress communication times. We need ways to be able to get that information the way that we want. Number 3, increased frequency of information. What we found, particularly with Gen Z and millennials, if they weren't hearing from their boss or company every day, many of them, not all, many of them felt they were worried they were going to lose their job. Oh, they're not talking to me. I guess I'm on the list. I'm going to get cut. So a little more frequency, just let people know that they're there, actually drives engagement and trust and loyalty because they feel like you're still staying connected. It could be a group text. It could be posting in Slack. It could be whatever it is that works for you. But frequency is very important, particularly among Gen Z and younger millennials, so they know they're still part of the group. So that frequency is really key. Next one, how you let go of employees determines the attitude of those who stay. With the PPP money running out for lots of people right now, and all the changes that are going on, there are going to be more and more layoffs, more than likely. We won't call them layoffs, furloughs, whatever term, hopefully they're furloughs and not layoffs. But this is important. People are going to be let go. And what's not talked about is how you let go of somebody determines the attitude of those who stay. And I promise you, when things get better, which they will eventually at some point, those people now will see what you're really all about because they remember how you let go of somebody else. So you absolutely let go of people with respect and class and dignity and humanity and empathy. Number 5, be clear on the non-negotiables. This is everything from safety to ethics to decision-making. It's easy to sort of create space around those because, again, we're not in the same physical space. But it's important for you as a leader to let people know this is absolutely still a non-negotiable. We talk about these every week, non-negotiables, whatever they are for you. And then number 6, implement some daily habits, easy, fast, quick things to keep people connected. At our company here at CGK, we do 5-minute huddles every morning. And then another part of the company does 5-minute huddles in the afternoon. And I share that with you because in those 5 minutes, we all get aligned. We know what we're going to accomplish for the day. We get to see each other. We feel that sense of connection. We go do what we're going to go do. And then in the afternoon, they do a different version of that. It's 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes allows us to stay connected. And we do it every single day at 9 a.m. So I share that. Find some of those daily habits, something simple that allows you to stay aligned and connected, and people will hold on to that. And the reason is right now what we need are rituals in order to stay connected, those things that we can lean on that we know bring connection to us. Okay, I want to share with you a last story, and then I will do my best to take a few questions. And let me tell you what we'll send you to. First, we're going to send you the report. We'll send you that. We will send you these slide presentation. I'll send you those. I know some of you may want me to come in and work with you directly, whether through a webinar or a virtual keynote, or you want to talk to me about some strategy or advisor work. If you want me to set up a call with, or if you want me to set up a call with Emily, so you can chat with her about what we do, if you want some more information, if you would just write in the chat, just write info, I-N-F-O, and we'll set up a time to talk about, whether that's a webinar or podcast or whatever I can do to help. Just write info, and that way I'll reach out to you. You can also send Emily an email if you want to do that. If you're very email-driven, Gen X, you can do that too, but I'd love to work with you. So let me share with you why this is so incredibly, incredibly important. Thank you to all of you writing info, please. I appreciate that. Thanks you, Ashley. Love to work with y'all. This is my passion, and it'd be awesome. So right now, this has been a really interesting time for our family, like many of you, for me, Denise and Raya. And the big sense of connection I get is doing webinars, in particular doing this, which is just for me to be able to share with you what we do. And I am so incredibly grateful for you, right? This is the most I've been home since I was 18 years old. And I absolutely love being able to connect with you today. 18 years old. And I love this. So thank you so much for being on this journey with me and allowing me to share this with you and hopefully work with many of you. I really love this. Okay, let's try to I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So, okay, look at that. I'm about to get emotional. All right, we're not going to get emotional today. Let's jump into some of the questions. Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks a lot. Let's see if we can pull some quick questions here. Let me scroll down. Okay. Gen Z will be living in the future for a long time. Want to get a glimpse into their thinking. Thank you, Chaim. The book will talk about that. We have a webinar coming up next month for those of you that are more interested in marketing and sales. It'll be similar to this, but what we'll do instead is we'll talk about all the consumer insights that we found. Well, let's see here. Okay. Several people just want to know, what are we going to send them? All right. I promise you, we will send you exactly what I shared with you, the report, the slides. We'll probably answer some Q&A, and I will send you the video summary as well. And then for those of you that are asking, yes, if you wrote in the questions info, just write it in chat, and I promise we'll reach out to you and we'll set something up. Most importantly, I just want to thank y'all again. It's been an honor to be with you. I'm so incredibly grateful for you, and I look forward to you joining me on the next webinar. All right. Thank y'all so much. You're the best. I appreciate you. All right. Bye.
Recuerda suscribirte a nuestro canal para que no te pierdas ninguno de nuestros videos. Activa la campanita, dale like y comparte. Gracias.